I think we're in the early stages of cloud computing standardization. There's a lot of work underway. There's many tens of organizations that are working in the cloud computing standardization space, and there are probably going to be more. The marketplace will decide what standards are important and what standards aren't important. So I'm not worried about, as some people are, duplication of standards. I'm worried that the appropriate standards get addressed somewhere to facilitate cloud computing interoperability. As many of you know, cloud computing is probably the most substantive change in the computing paradigm in our lifetime. I call it the fourth wave of computing, as do others. And I think the result of that fourth wave of computing will be even more significant than we saw with the internet wave. I think the rate of change will be greater. I think the impact on society will be greater. And I think the impact of standards on the cloud computing wave will have a great amount of change to the equation. Just a couple of statistics. IDC has forecast that this cloud computing market will exceed $70 billion in revenue in 2015. But probably more interesting for computer science potential students is the number of jobs that we expect cloud computing to add to the mix. And this is in the computer science side of things, not the number of jobs in industry that are added because of cloud computing. And I think those numbers are even bigger. So I probably don't have to talk to this audience about the importance of cloud computing, because part of that is why you're here. But these numbers depend on a robust, fast-growing market. And they depend on organizations like the IEEE to make this happen, and that's why we're here today to talk with you. As Sorrel mentioned earlier in the day, we're rolling out today a press release talking to the various constituencies of the IEEE about the Cloud Computing Initiative. The purpose of the initiative is to work with the various units of IEEE to coordinate activities that we already have underway, such as this conference that we're at today, to add activities where we think there are potential improvements in the mix that we have, and in particular to accelerate the development of standards through the use of the IEEE's standards capabilities. Most of the work that you see on this chart that we saw earlier is initiated or driven by societies in the IEEE. The Cloud Computing Initiative wants to be a facilitator and really only add where something needs to be added that isn't already underway at the societies, to coordinate the activities that are underway and to make things move more quickly where we can. The web portal that Sorrel mentioned is up and available. We hope we'll hear from you on the web portal using the comment button, and we hope you'll come to the other cloud computing conferences that are already scheduled this year and next year. And in particular, keep your eye out for Cloud Computing Magazine and Transactions on Cloud Computing and Cloud Computing Letters that we'll be launching. So send us an email, visit the website, join us. We're encouraging you to participate in the Cloud Computing Initiative and make the activities that we're doing fit your needs. Okay, let's talk about standards. I've outlined several generic standards topics that you can talk about, whatever the standard is that you're discussing. And I want to start with this and then talk about how this impacts cloud computing and what we've learned from the past, and hopefully in the questions we can talk about how to go forward in the future to use the knowledge to make this market develop faster. The first question is standard scope. In other words, what is in the standard? Is it a little standard? Is it a big standard? And how much do you try and fit in to the standards box? The second question is when? When should the standard be used, be developed? Is it too early to develop standards? Is it too late to develop standards, or is this the right time to develop standards? The third question that we often hear is how many standards need to be developed? And what about duplication, so-called duplication of standards? Is that a good thing, or is it a bad thing? Now, since standards are not controlled, for the most part, in many of our organizations in a completely top-down command and control mechanism, some of these questions can't be answered easily, but we can talk about whether it's good or bad to have more standards or have standards in the same space. And lastly, who should develop these standards? Should we insist that experts in the various fields do the standards? Here's an example of what happens when you let somebody write a random number generator algorithm. May not be a complete numerical expert, but chose a very good random number, may not be quite the right person to do this work. So who should develop the standards? Booz & Company did an interesting study of 9 dimensions of standardization against 14 types of standards. And they identified 47 different areas where a high probability, high value of standardization was identified. The other interesting thing from this study was that they identified 160 standards that were either in development, planned, or actually developed. So that's about a 3-to-1 ratio from the number of standards that they thought were needed and the number of standards that were being developed. Is this a good thing, or is it a bad thing? There are 1 or 2 organizations in existence that are developing standards. These are a list, this listing increases every time I give this presentation. This is a list of organizations developing cloud standards. There is some overlap in these standards, and some of these venues for standards development may not be as capable of standards development as others. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I want to talk just briefly about what James Gosling wrote about phase relationships in the development of standards. He talked about the technical activity and what he called political activity, which shows you something of his attitude towards the development of standards. And he asked the question of what the appropriate relationship is between these 2 curves, the technical activity and the political activity, in other words, standardization. If you integrate the technical activity, you get knowledge, or K. And if you integrate the political activity, you get C, calcification. So let's not get too hung up in his polemic. But the idea is if K is sufficiently ahead of C, you have positive value of standardization. And there's an obvious place to do the standardization, which is at the peak of that K minus C curve. So that's all well and good. If the calcification happens too soon after knowledge, then you have a much smaller value of standardization. And because there's a plateau there, it's not exactly clear when is the best time to do the standardization. So this confuses the issue, and it also gives you less value of standardization. Well, things could get worse. That is, the knowledge could follow the standards, in which case you have a negative value of standardization, and we don't really want to see that scenario. But I'm sure there'll be some questions about this. Where are we today in cloud computing? Which of these scenarios is the analog for our current situation? Well, we have a panel of experts in this space who are going to talk about their view of cloud computing and how standards intersects with what they're doing and what they're thinking. And when we're finished with hearing from the panel, we'll come back and we'll answer questions about cloud computing and standards.